Right now, everybody's talking about using psychedelics to heal trauma, to cure depression, to alleviate symptoms of anxiety, you name it. I'm really interested in, okay, you're a healthy person. You want to step into your potential. Can psychedelics help with that? And, that was my entry point. It was about discovering who I truly am underneath the veil of my physical body, my mental ruminations, and even the energy body to something that's deeper and true and immutable. Find the spirit. It's like the next frontier. And, at the risk of turning this into sort of an evangelical sermon around psychedelics, I do think that is the promise of them, as they reconnect us to a sense of something bigger than our individuated self.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Psychedelic Conversations. Today we have Henry Winslow in the house. Welcome, Henry.
Thank you. Yeah, it's my pleasure to be in conversation with you, Susan. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. And for our listeners, if in case they don't know you yet, and they will be getting to know you today, so I just want to say a few lines from your bio, and then we can start the conversation. So Henry is a founder of the Tricycle Day, a free twice-a-week newsletter on psychedelic research, policy, and business that actually fun to read. With a professional background in healthcare, marketing, and yoga, he's now focused on making psychedelic education accessible to all. And you can always find him on the newsletter Tricycle Day, which is my favorite. I think, Henry, since I discovered you, I definitely unsubscribed from a lot of places. So
Oh,
just for the record, I have, because I feel like you're doing such a great job bringing, all-encompassing educational material into my email. It is just very powerful and helpful. So thank you.
thank you. Yeah, that was really my intention with creating it. Not for people to unsubscribe from other sources, but to create something that was comprehensive, because that's what I was looking for before Tricycle Day existed, and I figured others might want the same thing.
Yeah, for sure. And with that said, I would like to ask you, what brings you to this work?
Well, I think this is probably true for 99% of people who are doing anything professional in the psychedelic world, the ecosystem, industry, whatever you choose to call it. And that's that it started with a profound personal experience for me. For me, that was in 2019, so about 5 years ago. Later in life, compared to some people, I didn't really have a lot of exposure or frankly interest in psychedelics as a young person, as a teenager, or even in my 20s. But for me, the interest came from my spiritual practice. I had become a very devout yoga practitioner, as you mentioned in my bio. I was a teacher, a yoga teacher, full time. I was traveling around the world, giving workshops, leading teacher trainings, teaching classes, of course, even had online classes and, ventured into entrepreneurship outside of just teaching in a yoga studio environment. But beyond the physical movement that a lot of people know yoga for, and even beyond the breath work, the pranayama, and some of the meditation that most people associate with yoga, what many people don't know is that the ultimate goal of yoga, at least according to the ancient texts in like the esoteric spiritual books of millennia's past, the ultimate goal was to reach a state of unity consciousness. It's called samadhi in the yoga system, and it's the last step in the Eightfold Path as outlined by Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras. And to me, that was a really interesting idea. It was a gripping concept, but I also kind of resigned myself that I would never experience it directly because it felt like something from a bygone era. I'm a modern man living in New York City at the time, bouncing around from studio to studio, trying to make ends meet. while the yogis of the past were able to disappear into the caves for years and fast in the darkness, and only then might you, maybe after many lifetimes of practice, might you get a chance to experience this dissolution into beyond the illusion of Maya, into the reality of oneness of everything. And nevertheless, it was something that I was very interested in. So I read about it, I nerded out about it, and I would be in conversation with other yoga teachers about it. And one day, another yoga teacher friend of mine said to me, "Hey, Henry, I just had this incredible experience. It was basically, the shortcut up the mountain straight to samadhi." And I said, "Tell me more." And with that, my interest in psychedelics began because she told me about a ceremony with Bufo alvarius, 5-MeO-DMT. And, within a week, after very little research, to be honest, and not much preparation, I didn't have the language for preparation or integration for that matter at the time, but I was committed to finding out what was on the other side. So I had that experience, and it was everything that I could have imagined it would be and a lot more. It was very profound, very transformative for me. Took quite a lot of time, and I would say I'm still integrating that experience because at age 30, having a completely eye-opening, mind-expanding experience that shows you that your whole life you've only seen the surface of reality is kind of challenging. But it was positive in the end. And yeah, that's what brought me into the world of psychedelics, if you will. Fast forward 4 years, that's when I started Tricycle Day. Like I said, back then I didn't have the framework for integration. I didn't know intellectually, but something intuitively told me don't jump into any heart like rash life-changing decisions after something like that. It's going to take some time to process. It was big. So fortunately, I was still working as a yoga teacher, so there was a natural outlet for me to be able to bring in the insight that I was, you know, internalizing from that experience, and I did, and I had a receptive audience to spiritual teachings, but I was also just figuring it out. Um, so I became an avid consumer of psychedelic media, as I said before, and as you pointed out, there are a lot of other sources to keep up to date on what's happening in psychedelics. But what I found was that all of them were either geared toward a very medically literate audience, or it was, laden with legal jargon. So very like speaking to the people who are in it. Or on the other end of the spectrum, it was, individual content creators, influencers who had a point of view, but it could be off-putting for other reasons, maybe a little bit too woo-woo for an everyday crowd. So I saw a white space opportunity to write an amalgamation of all the news. So one-stop shop, but also make it approachable. And so that's why I decided to bring humor into the space. It's a really heavy topic. Some even say sacred, which, I kind of agree with. And yet, serious topics still can be lightened up, and that's when I want to when I am looking for education, I also want to be entertained, and I figured other people would too. So that's where Tricycle Day came from.
That is so wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing the backstory. Um, I have a few questions here, but first one would be, would you say that your experience was so profound and more than you could have asked for is because you had a solid foundation in some of these practices? Maybe you had some strong discipline, strong personal, development experiences, and yoga is in itself is a lifestyle, right? So would you say that was kind of helpful and probably kind of took you on a journey that made it all very much deeply profound and meaningful for you? Would you say that?
I would definitely say that my background and lifestyle around yoga was incredibly helpful. 5-MeO-DMT, for your listeners who haven't experienced it or know much about it, many consider it to be sort of the Mount Everest of psychedelics. It's, or the crown jewel. It's a very, very powerful molecule. more so than psilocybin by a long shot, in my opinion. So to go from basically zero experience to that is a big jump. To go from anything to 5-MeO, honestly, is a big jump, but especially with no kind of like ladder getting you there. So the fact that I had done a lot of work with meditation and had expanded states, if you want to call it that, through certain yoga practices. Kundalini yoga, for example, can feel very similar to a mild psychedelic experience. I think that did give me a sense of familiarity and grounding to know that this is okay. And, moreover, I think it was about afterward. These experiences can be destabilizing for some people because it is so frame shattering. And so to be able to fall back on, okay, I'm just going to get back into my body, I'm going to get back into my practice and not feel like it was like a total interruption of my lifestyle. It was just going back to what was normal. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't had that because nobody was really telling me this is what you need to do in order to have a safe and easy landing back into 3D reality. So I feel very fortunate that I had that. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's really important for us to highlight this because, some of our listeners may just stumble upon these conversations and then not ever heard of psychedelics. And I remember, when I first started out, it was a Google search kind of thing.
Yeah.
I didn't even look for it; it just popped up through looking for something else, and then it suddenly popped up in the feed, and I had no idea. So I always find it very valuable to highlight that, having these solid disciplines and meditation practices and yoga and also different things like breath work. If anyone has tried a breath work or something else, I think that really lays the foundation so that, like you said, almost like holds them through that experience and also afterwards. I know nowadays it's all mainstream now. Psychedelics are really kind of mainstream and everybody's talking about it. And there's also a huge content around integration. A lot of courses are out there about integration, and there's loads of guides and facilitators, coaches help people integrate. So it's kind of, it's good in a way. But like you said, if somebody's just coming from a very desperate place of needing, instant change or help or support, I think it can be destabilizing for sure.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and also the other thing that I would like to ask you about is Tricycle Day. So where the name, I mean, it's really fun, and I like the way that you said you would like to bring some more humor, and that's exactly what I feel when I read it. Titles are always fun and makes you think, entertaining, but also very educational and also light. There is a lightness in there as well. So I really like that. And do you get a lot of responses because of it? Do you get a good feedback? I hope you do because it's so
Yeah.
worth it.
Yeah, I do get a lot of feedback, and part of that is because I solicit it. There's a section at the bottom of every newsletter where I ask people to rate the issue on a scale of 1 to 3, essentially. And there's an open forum after they cast their vote, and they can write whatever they want. So I take a lot of joy in reading those. And also, they're not all positive. Sometimes people have bones to pick, which is totally fine, and I take that seriously as well. So yes to the feedback. And I think the first part of your question was the name. Were you asking about where the name came from?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the name Tricycle Day, uh, I kind of think of it as like, okay, how can I bring playfulness into every part of the business, right? And this is sort of like an Easter egg or discoverable for those in the know. So the story is the anniversary of the first intentional dose of LSD by the Swiss chemist who discovered it, Albert Hofmann, is called Bicycle Day because back then chemists would just like take the chemicals that they developed and see what's the subjective experience that I get from this rather than all the controls that are in place now, or maybe in addition to all the controls. That would be the first step, right? And so he dosed himself with LSD, got on his bike and went home, and before long the walls of reality are melting before him on his bike. And so I'm not going to say that I advocate for riding a bicycle on LSD, though to each their own. But that's kind of like a fun piece of lore to the psychedelic community. And I figured, let me just make a twist on that. So I took Bicycle Day and turned it into Tricycle Day, thinking Tricycle Day is a little bit more juvenile, it's a little bit more easy, playful, and that's the spirit that I'm bringing into this conversation.
That's so fun. Yeah, that's so great. Thank you for sharing that. So, what's the long-term mission? Education is the main sort of foundation.
Mhm.
Yeah, what's the purpose and the mission of Tricycle Day?
Well, look, I mean, my purpose and my mission is very similar to probably yours and many other people who are working in the space in various capacities. I'm trying to normalize the conversation. I'm trying to remove the stigma, and I'm trying to create a platform where people can get fair information about psychedelics. Now, I'm not going to say I'm not biased. Of course, I am. I lean toward the pro, but I also share risks. I share the safety information that sometimes get overlooked. We were just talking about my experience and how it could have been destabilizing. And I've certainly seen other people have destabilizing experiences too. So I'm trying to basically take away all or do my part in taking away the color and flavor that people bring into these um, first conversations that they have, because more and more people are getting reacquainted to psychedelics through mainstream media, and they need a place to land when they keep reading the same things over and over again. They're like, magic mushrooms could be medicine, right? Like, what else is there? How do we pull that thread more? So I'm stepping in to fill that gap. Now, when I first started, my original vision was I'm going to write for people like me, people who are interested in the space, want to follow it, want to know what's happening, but they're enthusiasts, right? They're consumers, if you will. What I'm finding is that actually a lot of people who are working in the space also like Tricycle Day, and they're my most engaged readers. I thought, they were already covered with all the like dense material, but turns out professionals also like to be entertained. What do you know? So I'm rethinking, still the same mission and still the same high vision outcome for what I'm trying to do, but I'm rethinking the mechanism through which I have the most impact. And I think it is by working with the professionals, the facilitators, the therapists, the coaches who are working with psychedelics, because by doing that and helping them have a greater impact, there's a ripple effect there that's more than I can do on my own. So I'm leaning into that angle right now. And, I've got the agency side of my business where I help psychedelic retreats and clinics reach more clients. And I'm also putting together a different sort of container, like a mastermind sort of situation for the individual practitioners to improve how they show up in the world and make greater impact.
Yeah, this is so helpful and valuable. And I also enjoyed collaborating with you because I thought it was so good and so fun. And yeah, I remember once, our podcast was published as well, I had a lot of emails through some of these, readers. And I thought, what an amazing platform to be leading. And also, our interaction was really light and very fun, and you made it so easy. So I was going to ask you about your background in marketing, and you
Yeah,
seem to have a knack for simplifying and putting things in order very quickly, and also like seeing through the message very quickly. So I was really impressed by that, by the
thank
way.
you. Yeah, well, thanks for noticing that and the praise. I appreciate it. The part that I didn't share about my background, which is useful and relevant to writing Tricycle Day and everything that goes into the business behind it, is I also worked while I was developing my yoga practice. Right around the same time that I got into yoga, I stepped into the workforce, and my first job was in an agency, an ad agency, creative agency in New York that worked exclusively with healthcare and pharmaceutical clients. And I began on account service, basically like client management, but I quickly pivoted into strategy. And that's where I found, that was where I shined. And a lot of the job was to look at the science, like look at these clinical trial outcomes, and then put together messages that were compelling, not just for patients, but mostly actually for prescribers. Like, how do they make a decision to recommend this treatment to a patient based on the data? So there's a lot of input that you have to filter the noise out and find the signal. And when you've done it in that space, it's easier to do it in a lot of other spaces.
Yeah, it's kind of transferable, isn't it? Those skills are really amazing to have.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you definitely have a knack for it, for sure. For
Thank
sure.
you.
There is
And
that. Mm.
incidentally, actually, it isn't so much a translation in some cases now in psychedelics because of this medicalization pathway that's really like dominating the mainstream narrative. There's a lot of biopharma happening in psychedelics too, so it's a direct transfer, not necessarily a translation even.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that can this conversation, can we move from here to now towards maybe your observations? Since I'm guessing it takes a lot of maybe research time for you or not? Would you say that you spend, because to curate such an amazing content, I'm guessing there is a lot of research that goes
I do a
in.
lot of reading. Yeah, I do.
Mhm. So, and I think you'll be a best person to ask about your observations. What are you seeing at the moment? What's happening in the psychedelic world, and what happened to our psychedelic renaissance? That it was, this, whole thing was so exciting, and then we had this MDMA
Mhm.
um, rejection. So, what are your observations in a nutshell, if you was to share?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if we zoom out, which I think is what you're asking me to do, like take the high level view.
Yeah.
When I first started writing Tricycle Day, it was January of 2023, so about a year and 3 quarters ago. At that point, we had already had this huge peak euphoria bubble of biopharma psychedelic startups where there was all this funding coming in from VCs, and that had already kind of corrected. So when I came in, the mood had tempered a bit, but still medicalization was, I would say, the leading kind of pathway of the three. So there are three, the way I look at it, there are three paths happening right now. There's the medicalization through FDA approval for specific conditions, and that was Lykos Therapeutics, MDMA assisted therapy for PTSD, for example. We also have Compass Pathways pursuing psilocybin for treatment resistant depression, and so on, right? That's one. Then you have the legalization pathway, which is the state regulated model, Oregon being the pioneer there, where they have stood up Oregon psilocybin services, where facilitators can be licensed through the state and can facilitate experiences with clients, provided that they don't make any medical claims. So it's interesting. We talk about psilocybin assisted therapy, but it's actually technically cannot be called medical. It's a service. Okay. And then Colorado's next, and we have other states that are following in their footsteps. And then the third one, which personally is, the one that I think needs to take priority, is decriminalization. And decriminalization means taking away the criminal penalties, or at least lowering the priority of authorities upholding the law around the use of controlled substances. And these three paths sort of intersect in interesting ways. And one of my big concerns with medicalization leading the way, and so in that sense, in some ways, the disappointing outcome with MDMA assisted therapy could actually have a silver lining, is my concern is if medicalization happens, then there's a lot of money there. And the pharmaceutical industry, which psychedelics now are ingrained into, has the ability to lobby DC to maintain the status quo on the decriminalization because there's a financial incentive there. And, it's kind of it's kind of a cynical outlook, but, this has happened in the past in other classifications of medicine. So I don't want that to happen. I think it's cool that we see the three moving in parallel. It's inspiring, and there's a lot to follow. So part of my job is just to keep a pulse on all of it and let people know what's happening.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. This is very helpful too. I always love hearing the objective views of people that are really well read and researching and continually, following the news of the psychedelic realm. So, and also one other thing I would like to ask your opinion about. In the last 1 year, I think we also saw maybe highly credible names and they're falling. Like we had people being maybe charged with misconduct, or
Yeah.
like there is also there is the reality of the psychedelic medicines. There's a dark side, definitely. There is which we cannot avoid and, turn our eyes away. So what are your thoughts on that? We've seen, I mean, I've seen quite
Yeah.
a few high level credible figures that's just kind of disappeared from the space, right?
Yeah, sort of just erased from the annals of history. Well, hopefully that isn't what happens because I want to make sure that we as a collective learn from the experiences that we've had that show us the dark side. So two things come to mind for me when you bring that up. First is around the influential figures, and the second is around the people who might be receiving these medicines or having these experiences who may not know what the risks are. So first on that side, I'll go with that side first. Classical psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers. That's the term that was coined by Stan Grof. And essentially what that means is if there is darkness in your mind and you take a lot of mushrooms, that darkness is going to be amplified. And that's why people end up having challenging experiences that can be difficult in the moment and potentially beneficial in the long run, or they can be difficult in the moment and not beneficial in the long run. And that's why there's so much prioritization and talk about set and setting. We have to do our part to get ready to make the most of these experiences because they are not inherently positive. They are inherently neutral. So what can we do to set us up for a potential where the benefit is realized? Okay, so that's one part. And then as far as the influential figures taking advantage of their position, it kind of is it's the second side of the same coin, right? I mean, if you are a person who takes advantage of people, who has narcissistic tendencies or is traumatized, and we all know the old axiom, hurt people hurt people. We also know that psychedelics make you more suggestible. They put you in a suggestible state, so you are more vulnerable to being abused. So I guess the lesson there is just be very discerning about who you work with, because there needs to be a lot of trust there. Even more, I think people know that about traditional therapy. The relationship that you have between client and therapist has a lot to do with the outcomes that you get from it. It's like that, but times 10 with psychedelics, because you're actually putting yourself in a position to be psychologically manipulated if that person has malintent.
Yeah, and this is so great. Thank you for sharing. So I had a conversation with Dr. James Fadiman, and also I follow some of his content as well. And one of the things that I love about his approach is he's kind of he's an advocate for a trip sitting.
Mm-hmm.
So this whole therapeutic approach, facilitation, and it guides
Yeah.
therapists, and guiding the individual with these tools like there's IFS and different things that are now really very popular, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I can now see the value in why Dr. James Fadiman would be sort of like a positive on the trip sitting, because he says you don't need anyone to tell you. You just need somebody to sit with you to so that you can be safe. Your body is taken care of, and so you don't eat your plate, and you don't, all these kind of risks that you could be protected from. So the trip sitter is just sitting there to make sure that you are having your journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing now that the therapists are involved, and if they haven't done their own work, so there's a whole discussion about should therapists be, doing their own work equally, and if they should be undergoing their own psychedelic experience to be able to qualify to hold spaces and so on. But it's a really complex one, right? It's a really complex one. I feel like as soon as a therapist comes into the space and they try to attempt to guide and lead somebody, and there is definitely, since the suggestibility, there will be transference, there will be countertransference, and all those kind of things that may happen. So I'm guessing now it's almost like a very interesting point of psychedelic space. And with the mainstream of it all, do you feel like it's going to get worse? And I want to just add another one quickly. We now have, I just read a Twitter from Dr. Robin Card Harris. He he's kind of a little bit disheartened by this new emerging negative journalism
Mm.
on psychedelic space. So that there is that as well. So that's kind of increasing, I
Yeah.
guess, because it's becoming mainstream. I'm guessing that people are having more uncomfortable experiences, therefore they're speaking out more and they're sharing more because of social media. And
Mm.
now I'm guessing, yeah, the journalism is going to be louder, I think, but obviously would like to hear your opinion too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there was a lot in that question, so I'll try to remember all of it. I'll start with the
Okay.
end. The journalism piece. I like your take that it's a secondary outcome of the destigmatization, that people are being more comfortable coming forward with their experiences, be they positive or negative. I think that's probably a component, but I think the bigger driver, frankly, is journalism is a business that is built on driving clicks and collecting impressions. And so whenever one narrative becomes the dominant, there is a counter reaction to say something that's surprising and controversial. And so that's why when psychedelics first like came back into the media conversation, it was like, hey, guess what? We were wrong about, the dark ages where we said these were all drugs and they're the same as anything else. Actually, they can have positive experiences. That story got played out. And so now we have to swing the pendulum back in the other direction in order to surprise people. I think that is a bigger contributing factor than the openness, but it's probably a mix. Yeah. Um,
The
okay.
other
And
one,
then,
the other one was Dr. James Fadiman, thinking like,
yeah,
he's
trip sitting
trip sitting
versus,
rather than
yeah,
leading, and yeah.
yeah, totally. So first, I should say I've never had a clinical experience with psychedelics where it was, a therapeutic container where a therapist guided me in the moment. I have had many ceremonial experiences, and I've also had many self-driven experiences where a trip sitter was present, who basically did nothing other than give me some sort of psychological safety net that I'm not here physically alone, right? And I've had healing experiences in both. And what I will say about the therapeutic kind of model, without having any firsthand experience with it, is that there is a range. So I think it really depends on the dose and the medicine, right? Because if you're talking about using 5-MeO DMT, for example, there's no way you're interacting with a therapist during the peak experience. You're not even in contact with your ego. You've completely blown beyond that. So the therapeutic aspect comes in the support, the surrounding psychological support with preparation, counseling sessions, and integration counseling sessions. And I think, the neuroplasticity benefit lasts for several weeks in some cases, depending on the dose and medicine. So you still benefit from the neurochemical changes in your brain, but you're not in the subjective experience of the medicine. So I think that's an appropriate use of therapy in the traditional sense. The other one is if you're using a lighter dose or just a medicine that's easier to work with, MDMA being a great example. It's not a hallucinogenic drug, right? It turns off the amygdala, it opens the heart so that you're able to go back to memories that would otherwise be painful to look at, and you can see them from an objective point of view. That I think makes sense to have therapy with. I think it could also work independently. But the data shows, of course, people are questioning the validity of that data now, but the data shows that the therapy is extremely helpful. So Stan Groff had terminology for that too. He talked about psycholytic doses versus psychedelic doses. The psycholytic doses being those lower ones that are more workable. So you can have the conversation in real time, versus the psychedelic experience, which you would have independently and then discuss it with your clinician afterward.
Yeah, totally. Oh, thank you for sharing that and being very open, and also, having the open mind to speak about this. I think one of the reasons I'm passionate about talking these topics is that bring more awareness to it. I guess, we need to be neutral, and just like the psychedelics, and really be able to talk about everything, all encompassing,
Yeah.
areas of this substances. So now I would like to focus on the entrepreneurial side of it,
Sure.
psychedelics and entrepreneurship. Um, where would you, how do you see yourself? Where, and would you have more leaning towards that? Because I heard you talk about the masterminding. I see in the email actually. I hope I'm not late because I was really interested in that. So, yeah, if you could maybe talk to us about where you stand and where you're leaning towards.
Where I'm leaning towards in terms of,
Like psychedelics and entrepreneurship, or can we use psychedelics for enhancing our,
oh, yeah.
creativity and purpose, passion to
Yeah.
bring, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's using psychedelics to improve one's facility with entrepreneurship, and then there's entrepreneurship around psychedelics. I kind of believe in both right now because my business is about psychedelics, but the former is really based on this kind of hypothesis. Right now, everybody's talking about using psychedelics to heal trauma, to cure depression, to alleviate symptoms of anxiety, you name it, right? It's very much a pathologize, like here's a set of symptoms or a disorder, and psychedelics, with or without therapy, can help you solve it. I'm really interested in, okay, you're a healthy person, you want to step into your potential. Can psychedelics help with that? And, that was my entry point. It was about discovering who I truly am underneath the veil of my physical body, my mental ruminations, and even the energy body, to something that's deeper and true and immutable. Find the spirit. So I definitely think there's room for that. And they're just it's like the next frontier, right? And there are some other people, I've spoken to other people for Tricycle Day that are working on this from a more academic point of view. Like Dr. Manesh Gurin, he talked about it. He works with the Center for Minds on this kind of research. We're just scratching the surface of it, but there's a lot of unofficial research that's being done in this area. So yeah, the thing that you mentioned seeing an email about was I worked with a facilitator who's trained in, I'm not a facilitator. I don't conduct these experiences for other people. I've had them myself, but I don't step into that lane because that's a whole other kind of layer of responsibility. But I worked with a facilitator who does, as well as a sort of marketing director and entrepreneur coach outside of psychedelics. And we had this mastermind for entrepreneurs who wanted to use psychedelics to improve their businesses, to get over the hump of business challenges. And the people who came to that weren't necessarily working in psychedelics, right? They just had businesses. And without getting into detail, these are breakthrough experiences for people. Like, because at the end of the day, business evolution is personal development. Often, like, the thing that's holding your business back is something that you need to work on in yourself. It's not it's not that you need to learn how to do Facebook ads, it's you have to understand that you're worthy of success, So I think that there's a lot there. Yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, I love that. And I've always thought the same, I remember like several years ago, I used to be part of a coaching company where they taught to, bring your business online and sort of go after your purpose type of vision. And yeah, everything that was covered was all about you and your own process, your own understanding and your own growth in order to kind of, it's a direct reflection of your business as well. And people who struggled with their businesses or managing companies, they always had very deeply sort of personal conflicts or internal struggles. So I really hear that, and that's really true. Resonates with me too.
I think that's the most important
Yeah.
part, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say that there actually are sort of cognitive benefits that happen when you get people together in a room and share ideas that have taken down the walls of self-filtering. If you are able to use chemical means to turn off the amygdala, remove any sort of shame around expressing your truth, you get to the answer a lot more quickly.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and again, another question to you, Henry. So the masterminding, what are your intentions with that, and what's the vision there? In case our listeners may be interested also.
Yeah.
You said it's about bringing together entrepreneurs, I believe, so that they can show up better. So if you can talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, again, this is not my thing per se,
Mhm.
but I have participated as strictly a participant. And then I've also participated as someone who helps to organize the experience. And the ones that I've been a part of so far have been resounding successes. There's sort of two formats that we've done it with. One is a 1 day situation, classic mastermind setup, 10 to 15 entrepreneurs in a room around a round table. Each person takes uh, a session in the hot seat where they share their current business challenge and they get feedback, suggestions, experience from the others in the room. And of course, it is psychedelic assisted. So, that's what I was getting at before. You really you get to the heart of the matter so much more quickly. And not only are people able to share their feedback more honestly, the person who's receiving it also is more receptive because their guard is no longer up, and it's like the MDMA assisted therapy. You're just able to look at everything more objectively and find the truth. So that's really powerful for people because entrepreneurship is such a core part of people's identity. Their business becomes who they are, and you attribute not attribute, your mental state can get tied to the business metrics, that you're measuring. And we have to pull those apart. Your self-worth is separate from what's happening in your business. And once you can look at it, it's like, okay, it's pretty simple. We just move this here, move that there, and boom. So we've done that setup. This is the 1 day. And then more recently, we just had our first 5 day experience, which involved the whole medicine arc, very curated kind of experience with a day by day protocol. Yeah, I mean, if people have more questions about that, I hesitate to go into detail for obvious reasons. But if
For
people have
sure.
more questions about that, they're welcome to reach out, and I can explain more. We will be doing more of them, and the next one is going to be around my hometown in Austin, Texas,
Fantastic.
for both the 1 day and the 5 day.
Amazing. So, and will you be announcing that through emails as well? Or,
Yes, likely I will. I will in some way, shape, or form announce that.
okay, brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing. Yes, I was just, actually, that was my question. Is it now done, closed? The doors are closed, or is there going to be more opportunities? So thanks for
Yeah,
sharing.
there will be more opportunities, but the first one happened already. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. As we coming to end of our conversation, would love to have you back if that's okay, because I would love to hear this progressive field and your expertise in what you're doing. I think it's very valuable. And as like I said, as we're closing, I really want to appreciate everything you do, and also creating something, a platform that is kind of different than the usual, the sacred or the therapeutic or the traditional way of doing. But I think in the West, I always had, intuitively thinking that it cannot be just for healing. It cannot be just for, one way or another. I know there are different approaches now, and there's like churches,
Yeah.
being sort of in the US, more in the US, of course, as a sacrament and so on.
Yeah.
And then there is this indigenous preservations and really protecting and respecting and guarding those kind of traditions as well. But I always thought there has to be a movement of some sort to begin a very different path in the West, because I think we're very complex. Those of us are in the West, we live in a very complex, very noisy, and very different environment. And I think feels like you have started something. It's like the seeds are planted, and I would like to see the growth and also hopefully be part of it too. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah. I'll just add on to that as much as everyone is focused on healing, you mentioned these other sort of fringe movements, if you will, around churches and indigenous preservation. I actually think that they all do ladder up to the same thing, which is wholeness. That's why integration has taken center stage as being such an important piece of the psychedelic experience, because it is about taking the disconnected, disparate parts and bringing them back into one. And most people would end that conversation at the individual level. It's like my parts coming back to make me whole, but it's actually broader than that. It's the whole of everything coming together. And once that spirit, that ethos is infused into the way that you think, everything makes sense as being, it all works together. An entrepreneur, yes, there's the aspect of like the scoreboard is how much money the business makes, but that's not what drives it. It's about making an impact in the world. It's about creating change for the betterment of other people, right? So that's expanding the scope of wholeness. Finding connection in the transpersonal to the spirit through the church. That's finding wholeness. Thinking about the preservation of cultures that look different from yours. That's in the spirit of wholeness. So I really do think these all come together. And, at the risk of turning this into sort of an evangelical sermon around psychedelics, I do think that is the promise of them, is they reconnect us to a sense of something bigger than our individuated self.
Yes, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that too. So before we let you go, I'm curious to ask you, is there anything that you came across, surprised you, excited you, or, that you thought it was so powerful or different or unique in your research, in your, educational process that you could maybe share with our listeners?
Something so different that it shocked me. I mean, at this point, I've been pretty normalized to everything. Like for some people, someone who's reading Tricycle Day for the first time, they'd probably be shocked by half of the things that they read, if not more. But the one that I think takes a lot of space in my mind because it keeps coming up in so many of the biopharma startups is this notion of non-hallucinogenic or non-psychedelic psychedelics. There's a big debate in psychedelic science around whether it's the experience, like the trip, the subjective experience, that is responsible for the beneficial healing therapeutic effects, or is it something in the neurochemistry? My personal opinion is that it's both. They work together. The neuroplasticity, it does work in isolation because that's what we see happening with microdosing. People are not tripping, and yet they're able to take advantage of these windows where they can change their thought patterns, behaviors, and beliefs. So it does work, but I've also had incredibly profound visions on high doses of psilocybin, ayahuasca, where I came to have a completely different understanding of an event, a memory that was scarred into my brain. And I saw it in a new way and it changed my behavior in the future. So I'm curious what's going to happen there. There are a lot of dollars that have been invested in pursuing these non-hallucinogenic compounds because, there are obvious reasons why. It makes the treatment more accessible to more people. It takes down the amount of time and resources required to deliver it. So we'll see how that comes out. I'll be watching.
Thank you for sharing that. That's interesting. I think that's quite a common one too, right? Some of the people that are in the space, and especially those who had the experience. I think that some people I speak to, they find it absurd that they are trying to do this too. So
yeah, people get really riled up about it.
Mhm.
And yeah, to those people, I say, okay, do you believe in microdosing? And if they don't, fine. But if they do, there's cognitive dissonance there. So they are reacting emotionally.
Yeah, for sure. Great. Okay. So please tell us where our listeners can find you, where they can connect with you. We'll have everything in the show notes, of course. But for those that are listening on the go, please tell us where they can find you, connect with you, chat to you, reach out to you.
Yeah, that's easy. The first and best one is to subscribe to the newsletter at www.tricycleday.com. If you find this kind of stuff interesting and want to stay on the pulse and do it in a way that is not going to bore you to death, then that's the newsletter for you. And aside from that, I also post memes on Instagram daily. People like those. I have a lot of people who follow on Instagram who don't read the newsletter, so it's not like you have to do both. And then the last place I'm active on social media really is LinkedIn. So you can just search my name, Henry Winslow, there to find me.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your wisdom, everything that you shared with us today. Really appreciate that. Thanks for your time, Henry.
Thank you. Thanks, Susan. Yeah, it was fun talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining in, and hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. Please do comment, share in down below, and don't be shy. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.